We're just hours away from what could be a pivotal moment in the Georgia election interference case against former President Donald Trump. A federal judge will hear arguments from co-defendant Mark Meadows as he pushes to get his state charges moved to federal court and even possibly dismissed. District Attorney Fani Willis of Fulton County will provide evidence and legal arguments detailing her sprawling anti-racketeering case against Trump, Meadows, and 17 other co-defendants. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who is pressured by Trump to find him more votes, has been subpoenaed to testify, and tomorrow we'll likely learn, we think, the trial date for the federal election interference case against Trump. Special counsel Jack Smith wants it to start in January. Trump is pushing for April of 2026. Let's discuss all of this with lawyer George Conway. George, great to see you as always. Let me ask you, this could be, it's kind of strange to think that Fani Willis is going to be going into federal court to lay this all out to prevent.
Okay, so what just came out about Mark Meadows is absolutely devastating for Trump and his entire stolen election narrative. And I need you to understand why this testimony from Trump's own chief of staff is being called a bombshell that completely shreds every single defense Trump has been pushing for years now. The man who was literally in the room with Trump during the most critical moments after the 2020 election, the person who had more direct access to the president than almost anyone else in the entire federal government, went before federal prosecutors under oath and told them that Trump knew the fraud claims were lies from the very beginning. He knew there was no real evidence to support any of it. He was told repeatedly by his own people that the conspiracy theories were completely baseless, and he kept pushing the lies anyway because he wanted to stay in power no matter what. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
The White House Chief of Staff, former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, from having his case moved over to federal court. What are you going to be watching for?
Well, I'm going to be watching for is we're going to get a little preview of the evidence that she has. It's a little bit of a mini trial. The issue isn't whether he did bad things or whether Trump did bad things. The issue is whether or not what Meadows was doing was basically under color of his federal office, and that's the language in the statute. Under color.
What does that mean? Yeah.
What it means is that were you arguably working on behalf of the United States of America? And the answer is clearly he was not. I mean, he's been saying that I was exercising my First Amendment rights. Well, if you were exercising your First Amendment rights, you're engaging in political speech, which is violative of the Hatch Act, and that's not what you work for us. You weren't working for. You're not supposed to be working for the Trump campaign when you are chief of staff. So the answer is he went down there.
This is not some anonymous source making claims that cannot be verified or some secondhand account from people who were not actually there when it happened. This is Mark Meadows, Trump's White House chief of staff, the gatekeeper who controlled access to the Oval Office and managed the president's schedule and information flow, telling prosecutors under immunity protection that his boss knew the truth about the election and deliberately chose to lie to the American people anyway. And now those accounts are showing up in court filings and Jack Smith's final report and news coverage that is rocking Washington all over again because it goes directly to the heart of Trump's legal defense. Think about what Trump and his lawyers have been arguing all along throughout this entire saga. They say Trump genuinely believed the election was stolen from him. They say he was acting on good faith concerns about fraud that he sincerely held. They say you cannot prove criminal intent because Trump really thought he won and was just fighting for what he believed was right. That has been the core defense strategy from day one, that Trump sincerely and honestly believed his own claims about a stolen election, even if those beliefs turned out to be mistaken. And now his own chief of staff has completely blown that defense out of the water with sworn testimony under oath. Meadows told prosecutors that Trump was being dishonest on election night itself when he declared victory while votes were still being counted across multiple states. He said that by mid-December, weeks after the election, when they should have had evidence if it existed, Rudy Giuliani still had not produced any actual proof of the fraud claims he was pushing on television every night. He confirmed that the Department of Justice and Attorney General Bill Barr told both him and Trump directly that key conspiracy theories like the fake ballots hidden in suitcases story from Georgia had already been thoroughly investigated and completely debunked. And Trump kept repeating those exact debunked lies anyway and kept pressuring Georgia officials to find votes that simply did not exist. But here's the part that really shows Trump knew it was over and deliberately chose to keep lying anyway, despite that knowledge. Meadows reportedly told prosecutors about a specific moment after the Supreme Court rejected one of Trump's election challenges. According to Meadows, Trump reacted to that court loss by saying something like, "Then that is the end." He acknowledged out loud that the Supreme Court defeat meant his legal options were exhausted and there was nothing more he could do through proper channels. And then after saying that privately, he continued to publicly contest the election and push the fraud narrative and pressure officials and ultimately summoned the January 6th crowd to Washington. He knew it was the end and he kept going anyway because he refused to accept the outcome. That testimony is absolutely devastating for Trump's defense because it proves he had the criminal intent prosecutors need to establish for conviction. This was not a confused president who genuinely believed he won despite evidence to the contrary. This was someone who was told repeatedly by his own team that he lost, who acknowledged privately that legal defeats meant it was effectively over, and who chose to keep lying and scheming anyway because he absolutely refused to give up power under any circumstances. That is knowing criminal conduct with clear intent, not good faith political disagreement about election results. And now Meadows has become a lightning rod in conservative media because of this testimony. MAGA world is calling him a traitor who stabbed Trump in the back. The same people who praised him as Trump's loyal gatekeeper and trusted confidant for years are now attacking him viciously as a turncoat. But here's the thing about testimony given under immunity with serious penalties for perjury. It tends to be truthful because lying would create entirely new criminal exposure for Meadows himself that his immunity deal would not protect him from. He had every incentive to tell prosecutors exactly what happened truthfully because lying under oath would have been a federal crime. Legal analysts are calling Meadows the prosecution's inside man, the key witness who was actually in the room for the critical moments and can testify directly about what Trump knew and exactly when he knew it. All right, so let me walk you through exactly what we know about Mark Meadows' testimony and why it represents such a significant and potentially fatal blow to Trump's entire legal defense strategy in the election case. Because this is not just another piece of evidence to add to the already enormous pile. This is testimony from the person who had more direct access to Trump during this critical period than almost anyone else in the entire federal government. The chief of staff sees everything that happens in the White House. He is in the room for the key meetings with advisors and lawyers. He is on the important phone calls with officials. He knows what the president was told by various sources and exactly how the president reacted to that information. And now we know what Meadows told prosecutors under oath about what actually happened in those rooms during those critical weeks. Let us start with how Meadows ended up cooperating with prosecutors in the first place, because understanding that context is important for evaluating his testimony and his credibility. According to reports from ABC News and other major outlets, Meadows met with Jack Smith's team multiple times over an extended period, including appearing before a federal grand jury to answer questions under oath. He did this after receiving immunity, which means prosecutors agreed not to use his testimony against him personally in exchange for his full and honest cooperation with the investigation. That immunity deal is significant because it gave Meadows legal protection to tell the complete truth without worrying that his own words would be used to prosecute him for any crimes he might have witnessed or participated in. Now, some Trump supporters argue that immunity deals make witnesses unreliable because they supposedly have incentive to say whatever prosecutors want to hear in order to please them. But that argument fundamentally misunderstands how immunity actually works in the federal criminal justice system. When you testify under immunity, you are still under oath with all the legal obligations that entails. If you lie, that is perjury, and perjury is specifically not covered by the immunity agreement you sign. So Meadows had very strong incentive to tell the complete truth because lying would have created entirely new criminal exposure that his immunity deal would not protect him from at all. Prosecutors do not just accept whatever cooperating witnesses say without verification. They check testimony against documents and physical evidence and other witness accounts. If Meadows had lied about anything significant, it would have been discovered through that verification process, and he would have faced prosecution for perjury. So what did Meadows actually tell prosecutors during these multiple sessions? According to numerous reports from credible outlets, his testimony was absolutely devastating for Trump's core defense, that he genuinely believed the election was stolen from him. Meadows reportedly told prosecutors that Trump was being dishonest on election night itself when he declared victory while votes were still being counted across multiple battleground states. Think carefully about what that means for a moment. On the very first night before any specific fraud allegations had even emerged or been investigated, Meadows says Trump was already being dishonest about the results and claiming victory prematurely. This was not someone reacting to evidence of fraud that emerged later. This was someone who decided to claim victory regardless of what the actual vote count showed because he was not going to accept any other outcome. Meadows also reportedly told prosecutors about the ongoing and complete failure to produce any actual evidence supporting the fraud claims being pushed aggressively by Trump's team. By mid-December, weeks after the election, when they had plenty of time to gather evidence if it existed, Rudy Giuliani still had not produced any proof to support the wild allegations he was making on television every night and in court filings. Remember all those dramatic press conferences where Giuliani talked about massive fraud and foreign interference and rigged voting machines controlled by Venezuela? According to Meadows, none of that was backed up by actual evidence that could be shown to Trump's own team internally. The claims were being made publicly to millions of Americans without any factual foundation whatsoever. And critically, for establishing criminal intent, Meadows confirmed that Trump was told directly by the Department of Justice and Attorney General Bill Barr that key conspiracy theories had been thoroughly investigated and completely debunked. The fake ballots hidden in suitcases story from Georgia that Trump kept repeating, the DOJ investigated it and found it was not true. Claims about rigged Dominion voting machines switching votes, investigated by federal authorities and found to be completely baseless. The DOJ, Trump's own Justice Department, led by an attorney general he personally appointed and trusted, told him directly that the fraud claims were not supported by any credible evidence. And Trump kept repeating those exact debunked claims anyway in public, even after being told explicitly by authoritative sources that they were false. This goes directly to the intent element that prosecutors absolutely need to prove for conviction. Criminal intent means the defendant knew what they were doing was wrong and did it anyway. If Trump genuinely believed there was massive fraud, even if that belief was unreasonable, that would make proving criminal intent more difficult for prosecutors. But if Trump was told repeatedly by authoritative sources, including his own Justice Department, that the fraud claims were baseless, and he kept pushing them anyway knowing they were false, that shows he knew he was lying to the American people. That is the smoking gun evidence for criminal intent that prosecutors need. Then there is the Supreme Court moment that Meadows reportedly described to prosecutors in detail. After the Supreme Court rejected one of Trump's major election challenges, Meadows says Trump reacted by saying something like, "Then that is the end." He acknowledged out loud that losing at the Supreme Court meant his legal options were completely exhausted. This testimony is crucial because it shows Trump understood at some specific point that he had lost through all available legal channels. And yet, after making that acknowledgement privately, he continued to publicly contest the election as if nothing had changed. He continued pushing the fraud narrative aggressively. He continued pressuring state officials to change results. He continued planning for the January 6th rally and what would happen that day. That sequence of events completely destroys the defense that Trump genuinely believed he won the election. He acknowledged privately that a Supreme Court loss meant it was effectively over and there was nothing more he could legally do, and then he kept going publicly as if that acknowledgement never happened. That is not someone acting on sincere belief in their cause. That is someone who knew the truth and deliberately chose to ignore it because he wanted to stay in power regardless of what the law or the courts or the Constitution or the voters said. Meadows also reportedly confirmed important details about the pressure campaign on Georgia officials, including the infamous phone call where Trump asked Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to find enough votes to change the state's outcome in his favor. Meadows was on that call and heard everything Trump said, and his testimony can corroborate the recording and provide important context about what Trump's actual state of mind was during those conversations. When Trump said he just wanted to find the votes, Meadows can testify about whether Trump actually believed those votes existed somewhere or whether he was pressuring an official to manufacture a fraudulent result. The significance of Meadows as a witness simply cannot be overstated in a case like this. In white-collar and political prosecutions, cooperating insiders are often the most important evidence prosecutors have available. Documents can be explained away or put in different contexts by defense attorneys. Recordings can be interpreted different ways depending on who is doing the interpreting. But when someone who is actually in the room testifies directly about what happened, that carries enormous weight with juries. Meadows was not some peripheral figure who heard things secondhand through other people. He was the chief of staff, the person managing Trump's schedule and access and information flow every single day. If anyone knows what Trump knew and when he knew it, it is Mark Meadows. Jack Smith's final report specifically highlights Meadows as a pivotal witness in establishing Trump's knowledge and criminal intent. The report explains how Meadows' testimony fits into the broader evidentiary picture, showing that Trump was repeatedly informed the fraud claims were false and that he continued pushing them anyway as part of what prosecutors describe as a criminal scheme to stay in power illegally. The testimony is not just one isolated data point, it is corroborating evidence that connects to documents and recordings and other witness accounts to create a comprehensive and damning picture of Trump's criminal conduct. Alright, so let us break this whole situation down into the key points you need to understand about Mark Meadows' testimony and why it represents such a devastating blow to Trump's entire legal defense strategy in the election interference case. Point number one that you absolutely need to understand, Meadows told prosecutors under oath that Trump was being dishonest on election night itself when he declared victory while votes were still being counted before any fraud allegations had even emerged or been investigated. This is crucial because it shows Trump's dishonesty started from the very first moment, not as a response to evidence of fraud that emerged later, but as a premeditated strategy to claim victory, regardless of what the actual vote count showed. The chief of staff who was with Trump that night and saw everything is saying under oath that the president was lying from the very start of this whole saga. Point number 2. Meadows confirmed that by mid-December, Rudy Giuliani still had not produced any actual evidence to support the fraud claims being pushed publicly, meaning Trump's own team knew internally they were making serious allegations without any factual foundation whatsoever. This matters enormously because it shows the gap between what was being said publicly to millions of Americans and what was known privately inside the White House. Trump's lawyers were going on television every night, making dramatic claims about stolen elections and rigged machines, and internally, there was absolutely no evidence to back any of it up. Trump knew this because his chief of staff knew this, and Meadows has now confirmed it under oath. Point number 3, Meadows told prosecutors that Trump was informed directly by the DOJ and Attorney General Barr that key conspiracy theories, including the fake ballots and suitcases story, had been investigated and completely debunked, yet Trump kept repeating them anyway. This goes straight to the heart of criminal intent. When the president is told by his own Justice Department, by officials he appointed and trusted, that specific fraud claims are false and have been investigated, and he continues making those exact claims publicly anyway, that proves beyond any reasonable doubt he knew he was lying. You cannot claim good faith belief in something you have been explicitly told is not true by authoritative sources. Point number 4. Meadows reportedly described Trump acknowledging after a Supreme Court defeat that it was effectively the end, only to continue publicly contesting the election anyway, which proves definitively he knew his legal options were exhausted and chose to pursue illegal ones instead. This is the moment that completely destroys the genuine belief defense Trump's lawyers have been pushing. Trump said privately that a Supreme Court loss meant the end, and then he kept going publicly as if nothing changed. He knew the legal fight was over and he did not care. That is criminal intent in its clearest possible form. Point number 5. Meadows testified under immunity with serious penalties for perjury if he lied, which means he had very strong incentive to tell the complete truth because lying would have created new criminal exposure not covered by his immunity agreement. Trump supporters attack cooperating witnesses as unreliable and biased, but immunity deals actually create strong incentives for truthfulness. Lying under oath is still perjury and still prosecutable. Prosecutor verify testimony against other evidence before relying on it. If Meadows had lied about anything significant, it would have been discovered and he would have been prosecuted. His testimony is credible precisely because he had so much to lose by being dishonest. Point number 6. Meadows' testimony is highlighted in Jack Smith's final report as pivotal evidence establishing Trump's knowledge and intent, proving that the man closest to Trump in the West Wing during this period confirmed the boss knew the fraud claims were lies and pushed them anyway as part of a criminal scheme. This is not peripheral evidence or circumstantial inference that requires connecting dots. This is direct testimony from the person who managed Trump's schedule and information flow every day, saying the president knew the truth and chose to lie to the American people. That is as direct as evidence gets in a criminal case like this. The bottom line here is that Mark Meadows' testimony fundamentally changes the legal landscape for Trump by providing direct evidence of criminal intent from someone who was actually in the room during the key moments when decisions were made. Trump's defense has always rested on the claim that he genuinely believed the election was stolen, that he was acting on sincere if mistaken beliefs about fraud. Meadows demolishes that defense completely by testifying that Trump was told repeatedly the fraud claims were baseless, that his own Justice Department debunked the conspiracy theories, that Trump acknowledged privately a Supreme Court loss meant it was over, and that he kept lying and scheming anyway. That testimony proves Trump had the criminal intent prosecutors need for conviction. He was not a confused believer acting in good faith. He was a knowing liar who pushed false claims as tools in a criminal conspiracy to stay in power illegally. His own chief of staff, the person he trusted with managing the White House every day, has said so under oath with penalties for perjury if he was lying. That is devastating evidence that no amount of attacking Meadows' character or motives can overcome, and this matters for reasons that go beyond just the legal case against Trump. The Meadows testimony is now part of the permanent historical record that future generations will have access to. People will be able to read what the chief of staff told prosecutors about what happened inside the White House during those critical weeks. The truth is documented officially. It cannot be erased by political spin or personal attacks on witnesses or attempts to rewrite history. The reaction from MAGA world, calling Meadows a traitor and attacking his credibility, actually proves how damaging his testimony really is. If it did not matter, they would simply ignore it. The fury of the response reflects the seriousness of the threat to Trump. They know that having Trump's own chief of staff confirm under oath that the president was lying about the election is absolutely catastrophic for the stolen election narrative they have been pushing for years. And Meadows is not alone in telling this story. His testimony fits into a broader pattern of people who were close to Trump during this period, eventually telling the truth about what happened. Bill Barr said publicly there was no evidence of fraud. White House lawyers warned Trump the schemes were illegal. Pence refused to go along with the pressure campaign, despite enormous personal and political pressure. One by one, the people who were actually in the room have confirmed that Trump knew the truth and chose to lie anyway. That is the complete picture that emerges from all the evidence taken together. A president who lost an election fairly, who was told he lost by his own team repeatedly, who acknowledged privately that legal defeats meant it was over, and who chose to lie to the American people and pursue criminal schemes to stay in power anyway because he refused to accept that voters rejected him. Mark Meadows' testimony is the inside account that confirms what all the other evidence strongly suggests. The man who was closest to Trump during those critical weeks has told prosecutors, under oath, that the president knew the fraud claims were lies and pushed them anyway. That is the truth, and no amount of attacking the messenger can change what the message says. All right, that is where I'm going to leave it for today. The Mark Meadows testimony is one of the most significant pieces of evidence in understanding what really happened after the 2020 election and what Trump actually knew. Make sure you are subscribed because we are going to keep tracking all of these developments. I will catch you in the next one.